Jackson Cantwell is a transcendent recruit. Where is he going and why is he so important?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal news. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends at TurboTax. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com to get matched with your expert. We are going to talk about arguably the most unique offensive tackle recruit I have seen in quite some time. And it reminds me of going back all the way to the days when Joe Theismann had his leg broken. Offensive tackle couldn't handle Lawrence Taylor. Offensive tackles have been more and more important all the way down to the high school ranks with guys like Cantwell and recruiting ever since. It's something that goes up every single year. You see these tackles goes high in the draft. And that's why we're going to talk to my guy, John Garcia Jr. from Rivals.com. Mr. Garcia, you're a national recruiting analyst. You and I have talked about Cantwell before. First of all, thank you for coming on the show. But there aren't many guys like Cantwell. You and I watch offensive tackles and talk about it all the time, how important it is. I mean, I literally remember the play where Theismann had his leg broke. I know where I was standing. It was a freaky deal. It changed football. That play did. And offensive tackles are more and more valuable. It's rare we don't see one of them go in the first 5 or 6 picks now in the NFL draft. First off, why do you love Cantwell? And what do you think makes him unique in terms of his upside?
Well, what's not to love? I mean, he's 6'7", 6'8". He's got, Olympic pedigree from his parents, and he's already built like the prototypical number one tackle at any level. He's right around 300 pounds. He moves incredibly well, extremely functional from a leverage standpoint, as you would expect, given that his parents were able to throw on the track at the Olympics. And he's a competitor. I mean, really the only questions we had, 6 months ago were, he's great. He's got all the traits. He's got the pedigree, everything you want. But who is he playing, in the Midwest? But he goes to the Under Armour All-America game as a junior and really playing right tackle for the very first time. This guy's, of course, a left tackle day in, day out. Playing right tackle for the first time, all he does is borderline dominate the crop of not only juniors, but rising seniors down in Orlando at this national event. So really the final base box for Cantwell to have checked was the competition factor. And now we know he can absolutely contend with the very best. A lot of people are sky high on a Zion Ely, for instance. And when Ely matched up with Cantwell, if he couldn't beat him with speed, which he did a couple times, he tried to work underneath with counter moves and his hands, and it was no contest. Cantwell got Ely on the ground more times than not. That's how powerful he is. That's how quickly he can redirect, even against the smaller, shiftier speed rusher. And again, it was his first time playing right tackle ever. And for those who don't realize, moving from one side to the other, that is a huge ask at any position, even wide receiver. It's not as easy and smooth a transition as some would think. Imagine on the offensive line where for a decade you've been the man on one side and now you're on the other side of it playing, mirror football. So he didn't, complain about it. A senior had that left tackle spot and he earned it. Michael Fasusi, who had a great week himself. So Cantwell was on the right side and yeah, he was borderline dominant, so the tape checks out, the pedigree checks out, the recruitment, checks out. Everybody in the country wants this kid. And again, in that live, example, he did it against the very best in a very good way.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing how well he adjusted because I remember seeing Fasusi out there and I'm like, okay, how are they going to align him? And, like you said, Fasusi gets the left. I guess that's just 6 one way, half dozen the other because they're both elite players. But I thought he'd handled it pretty well too. And we watched some of the one-on-ones and we watched him kind of go through some of the mock drills with pass rush and all that. He didn't look like he'd missed a step because he looked the same as he did on the right as when I'd watched his junior huddle film. And I'm like, okay, this is not normal, but he adjusted well. And like you said, the most important thing to me, he just wanted to compete. Most of the time when kids at that level don't get their way, it doesn't go well with them, first off. He was great with you, me, and everybody in the media. Didn't complain to the Under Armour people and just competed. Those are the guys I want on my team every day of the week. And that probably elevates his recruitment in a lot of different ways with coaches too, because that stuff gets back to them. You guys at Rivals have him the number one player in the country. I tell people all the time, attitude, how you treat media, how good you are in front of a camera, all those things go into the culmination that is a final ranking. Talk a little bit about that, because like his dad's awesome. Talk about a little bit about why that helps, Dan Lanning at Oregon or any other coach feel comfortable with making a big NIL offer to a kid like Mr. Cantwell.
Yeah, I mean, look, we are essentially, any ranking, right, is a gamble on the future, right? And we're trying to project several years down the line. So what do you look for? We talked about the basic boxes to check, and he checks all of those in Sharpie. But I think when you start to zoom out a little bit, you go to premium position, right? Offensive tackle, left tackle. He's the future, blindside protector of the face of your program. Those are pretty safe bets. You go back to the functional athleticism and the bloodlines, and you feel really good about him maintaining, a sort of grounded level. And when you start to split hairs between 5 stars and even the offensive tackle group, I mean, Iheanacho's great. I mean, it's a really nice group once again. Even amongst that group, when you start to split the hairs, you're betting on the kid that's going to stay on this track sort of the longest, right? And again, you start going into the data with Cantwell, and everything, points towards safety. It points towards a safer bet, because the more data we collect, the more comfortable we feel about Cantwell at that top spot. Now, we mentioned Iheanacho on his tail. There's a big time group of quarterbacks on his tail phase, on Brandon, Jared Curtis, who's about to, we think, make a huge decision that affects a lot of people. There's a nice group at the very top of this list, but Cantwell has sort of, held them off because there's just so much projected safety in the pick. Now, are we ranking to say, hey, our top 10 is going to be the top 10 of the draft in 5 years? Of course not. I mean, we'd like that, but it's impossible to try to project it. But when you start to get to the nitty gritty, the guys who stay, closest to number one are the ones you feel just that much better about relative to their position, relative to the NFL draft and those trends. And of course, as you mentioned, since the 80s, offensive tackle is only increasing in value, whether it's right or left. And Cantwell, fits a lot of those bills. So he's got that nod right now, and I think he's going to have a chance to hold on to it.
Yeah, John, I think that the offensive tackle position this year, I think it's really good once again. And for those of you that are watching this on YouTube, I'll discuss this. For those of you listening on audio, going over the rankings that right now that are live on Rivals.com. We got Cantwell at number 1. You mentioned Emmanuel Iheanacho. He's number 2. He's a kid out of Georgetown Prep. He actually lives in the Baltimore area, but he makes the drive down to Georgetown Prep in D.C. every day. I mean, he's even bigger than Cantwell, by the way, which is just hilarious in its own way, because he's 350. But, I mean, you got Felix Ojo, a kid out of Lake Ridge High School in Mansfield, Texas. That kid is super athletic. He's not quite as filled out. And like in any other given year, you could see one of those two, and there's some others I'll talk about momentarily, that would be number 1 or number 2, not just like overall at their position, maybe even top 5 in the country. This is a great year for offensive tackle again. It's fun for us because you and I like talking about it, but I think that it still shows you how important Cantwell is, because despite the fact that they're there, he's number 1. Then you go down the list, like you guys have Kevin Brown, who's committed to Penn State. He's out of Harrisburg, PA. He's number 4. You got John Turntine, another kid from the greater Dallas area at North Crowley. A lot of people think he'll end up at Texas. Pierre Dean out of North Carolina. He's undecided. Cody Green, who is committed to Oregon. Pape, kid you and I know very, very well. He's up to 330 now, actually. He's out of IMG. Any of those guys in a given year, they could be the number 1 guy. And I just think that it's really, really wild that we have somebody like Cantwell that is top of the board, and everybody – I haven't seen anybody say that he wasn't like the best guy. And again, I think it's partially the media part. I think that it's the bloodlines you brought up. Not one, but both of your parents go to the Olympics. That's
what do we do? What do we do with that? I mean, it's like, it's like the Arch Manning effect. Like, oh, well, hey, my family produces quarterbacks at a very, very high clip. Exactly. And people hated on whoever had him number 1, and Rivals did. for that. But look, that's a data point. How do you go against those things? And that stuff carries. Look at what Shedeur Sanders is enduring now as he transitions into the NFL draft. Arch Manning's going to be the talk of college football, like starting tomorrow, the day after the draft ends, spring football, all of that. So, that stuff matters at the highest of levels. And again, our job is to project how things are going to go through college into the NFL. So if it matters at that level, we've got to consider it much, much more. And again, when you're talking offensive linemen, if there's some magical bucket you could pull traits from, you would say, Olympian in the shot put in the discus, you would probably throw in wrestling and competitiveness. I mean, those would be like the main things. And Jackson's got all of those things to his name. So like you mentioned, it's a really great tackle class. And I think there's variety, right? Iheanacho's 340, and he carries it somehow very well. He's not a sloppy guy, and he moves much better than you would think for someone who is 340. You mentioned some of these other guys, Kenai Pepe, 6'7", 6'8". All these guys are 6'7" or better. I mean, it is a towering offensive tackle class, but there is variety. Pepe is extremely technical as a pass setter. We'd like to see a little bit more, power and toughness, and now he's added that weight. So we'll see if his game sort of, comes full circle as a senior at IMG, but everyone's still got questions out there. So I think these top guys are going to maybe fluctuate near the top, but again, when the dust settles, the cream rises, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be hard to pull Cantwell off of that one line, especially among offensive tackles. But ditto for number one, overall, because it's a premium position with so many boxes now checked as an All-American who competes. And shout out to that entire group of tackles. All those guys, Brian, we've seen at several camps going against several great players. They're all competitors at the top of the group, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
No, and I think that if you're going to strike, like if you're going to make an NIL deal to kind of quote unquote, as you mentioned earlier, you're gambling on the future. If you're Oklahoma, if you're Oregon, if you're Miami, we'll talk about Cantwell momentarily with his recruitment. It'd be hard to go wrong with any of the young men that we've mentioned today. We've all seen them in some capacity at a camp or 5-on-5, whatever. It's a great group. Now for Cantwell's recruitment, my guess is in the end, Missouri wins out, and I'm just going on gut. I have zero insight on that. Zero. Talked to his dad. I've talked to him. I don't think they know where they're going. What is the latest that you have heard on Cantwell, and why should any one school feel like they got a shot here?
Well, yeah, the visits are starting to ramp up here, right? It's visit season. I think Ohio State's next on his list. He's got a bevy of official visits that he's going to take as well. And yeah, the buzz really does kind of start with Oregon. And I think that started down in Orlando at Under Armour, where both he and Iheanacho all but said Oregon is driving this recruitment, So anytime you hear that, your ears sort of perk up. He's been out there. I think he's going to continue to visit. Miami thinks they're a nice dark horse in this race. We know when it comes to offensive linemen, Mario Cristobal, Alex Mirabal, that battery is something that resonates. And ditto up at Oregon with Alik Terry, who's one of the younger offensive line coaches, in college football. He's from Miami, so he's got this national appeal. Played at Wake Forest, so he's been everywhere. He's an up and coming star among offensive line coaches and recruiters. So you understand why his youth can help a guy like Cantwell resonate more so than some older offensive line coaches. But look, the classic blue bloods are in there too. Ohio State. Yeah, how could you sleep on Ohio State coming off of a national championship? We know what kind of NIL packages that the Buckeyes can pull together. Part of the reason that they won the Natty, and I think they'd be pretty upfront about that as well. So really hard to count out those schools. And then there's Missouri. I mean, he's a Missouri kid, right? Maybe the best prospect to come out of that state in quite some time. 3-hour drive from home for him. So when you get the national offer list, it's great. You're going to get on a plane and take these official visits, but there's always something to be said for those local and semi-local programs. So, Eli Drinkwitz and Missouri are going to swing for the fences with Cantwell, pitch the SEC, pitch that level of competition that we know Jackson is game for. And it looks like they're going to be in this thing till the end. So as you would with any monster in the trenches, SEC, Big Ten, SEC, it's going to default to those two conferences, with maybe Miami again as that dark horse, that outlier that feels like they've got a puncher's chance. But I think the most important part of this is what you said 10 minutes ago. we don't know if they know that, this is not a recruitment where, hey, this school's in the driver's seat, everyone's chasing them, the kid's acknowledging it, everyone's acknowledging it. He's hinted at a little bit of that, but I do think there is an openness towards these visits and towards these programs that I think there's going to be a little bit of twist and turn in this recruitment. So right now we'd probably, handicap it with Oregon, near the top of the list, Ohio State, Missouri, all in there thereafter. But I think that order could start to fluctuate as Cantwell and his family hits the visit trail harder, not only for these spring visits, but of course for these official visits in the summer.
Yeah, I agree. Georgia, Michigan, Miami.
I mean, look at those programs.
Yeah. It's not hard to sell some of those programs if you're a coach and you got the NIL funds they have. When we come back talking about recruiting success, Clemson, my goodness, they are on a heater. We're going to talk about that next here on The Portal. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, spending, all in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Here's something to think about. Instead of just juggling your multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check on your finances, track spending, even plan for your long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without any stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off on your first year. This show is also brought to you by our friends at Factor. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. 40 options across 8 dietary preferences each week. You can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle. Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, Keto, plus Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. As an example, you can try out the Protein Plus meals, and they are packed with flavor and kept you full each and every day. Make sure you check out Factor Meals. The convenience is also unbeatable because while you're saving time with your meal prep, you can do things that you want to do. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege, 50 off, and use code LockedOnCollege 50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnCollege 50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege 50 off to get 50% off free shipping with your first box. John, Clemson's ability to recruit is one of the most unique in the recruiting industry. And I don't really understand it in totality, the way they use the portal, NIL. It's different than anybody else. But no matter how you get there, getting 7 commitments in roughly a week, that is a recruiting heater that we don't see in this industry very often, especially in March. That is just bonkers. Why do you think Clemson was able to do this, and what is the pitch they're using? I have people ask me, and I honestly don't know. I've never been to the campus. What is the deal? And we'll go over some of the players momentarily, but how do they get so many kids to commit in just such a rash of short time?
Yeah, Brian, this was clearly strategic, right? This is something that was planned over a very long period of time for the Tigers. They recruited their tail off for a smaller group of recruits, which is their MO, right? I mean, it's hard to get that Clemson scholarship offer in this age of programs throwing out 300-400 offers a cycle. Clemson is in the double digits, right? So to earn that Clemson offer itself is a big deal, and that enables them to really hone in and look for what we kind of call Clemson guys, right? Guys who fit that Clemson culture, and it's very polarizing. It's one of those where you either do or you don't. It's like Alabama under Nick Saban. Like, it's very specific in terms of what they're looking for on and off the field. So you start to figure that out, junior year going into senior year. And I think into the new year, as the dead period, encompassed February, coming into March, Clemson was like, look, this is the weekend that we always try to prioritize. It's got its own name and everything. This is the weekend where it seems like every year Clemson goes on a bit of a run. Not 7 commits in 7 days. That's as good as we'll see. But leading into that trip, they were telling other recruits. I spoke to one yesterday who's no longer considering Clemson, but he said, hey, they tried to get me up for that March 8th weekend because they knew they were getting verbal commitments. And look, I think you guys are a smart audience. You understand that a lot of this is school driven, right? These commitments and when they come out, a lot of times the kids do it on one day and 2, 3, 4 days later is when it becomes public knowledge to, the rest of the college football world. And oftentimes it's strategic. The college is trying to dictate when these kids drop these announcements, these graphics, et cetera. And I think Clemson did a really nice job of it. So they knew they had 3 or 4 that wanted to jump in, and they knew that would potentially be a catalyst for other guys. And it worked out perfectly. A guy like Grant Wise wasn't planning on committing to Clemson when he went on the trip, right? This is a Miami legacy who's got as strong an offer list as Jackson Cantwell, right? One of the top interior guys, maybe a center at the next level. Really important visit slate coming up. But, he said just as he sat on campus and as time sort of went by, he saw these other kids committing and he understood sort of what the culture was going to be there at Clemson under Dabo Swinney. It's set, it's faith-based, it's very, minimalistic in terms of numbers. They're not going to be at the scholarship limit like any year at this point because they don't use the portal. It's very much a classic program that wants to grow and develop its players on and off the field. And that sounds simple, but in this day and age, that is almost becoming the minority, right? We see programs that are looking for mercenaries. Look at Florida State. I mean, it's portal heavy every year, and it works like it did in 2023, or it crushes you like it did in 2024 because you're hiring 6-month mercenaries based on NIL deals. So it could be a boom or bust. Clemson is looking for more of that steady flow where they can have you sit and develop there at Clemson. It's not perfect, and obviously they still deal with the portal, but on the front end of it in recruiting, they identify early, they latch onto a smaller group of prospects, and they try to prioritize them leading into these big visit weekends. So, you get a Grant Wise, you get a Chance Barkley, you get a Naeem Burrows, who might be the most explosive receiver in the country. You're getting a lot of guys that makes it sort of feel like, hey, Clemson is kind of doing the thing they used to do when they were, running college football. They're doing it their way, and it really can create a snowball effect for a lot of recruits. And obviously we saw 7 jump on board, but I'd say half of those guys didn't plan on committing going into the trip. Burrows had buzz for Florida and Florida State and some of these other programs. I think Chancellor Barkley was probably a little bit more likely to commit. If there's a better Clemson fit in this class, point them out, than Chancellor Barkley. But we said, Grant Wise wasn't planning on it. Some of these other guys weren't necessarily planning on it. So I do think that combination is a smart one for colleges to try to go out and snatch momentum. And now that Clemson has done it, jumping all the way up to number 2 in the rankings for us at Rivals, now let's see who the next program is that tries to do the 1 commit a day thing for a small stretch. We'll see it happening. It's a copycat league, just like it is in the NFL. So another program is going to go on the Clemson run here, in the 2nd and 3rd weekends of March with the dead period lifted. It's just par for the course. And every school wants to be done early. I think that's another big part of this. Everybody wants to have their class sort of set between spring and summer so that you go into the season knowing what you have coming in so you can deal with your own roster management, maintenance, portal, whatever else you got going on, and obviously the season itself.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll go ahead and share my screen and just show the kids that the Clemson Tigers have committed. For those of you who are on YouTube, for those of you who are not, I'll read them all off here. But this, as they say, is quite the list. Florida State and some of these other schools, like you mentioned, Naeem Burrows was one of those guys. But going in descending order, Caden Gebhardt out of Ohio, safety committed, Marcel Gibson. They got a kid out of Dallas, John. They don't normally get a lot of those guys, but he can fly, and he's from Dallas, South Oak Cliff, one of the best programs. You mentioned Grant Wise, arguably the best center in the country. He's from the greater Pensacola, Florida area. Chancellor Barclay, offensive lineman of Orlando, first academy. He's one of the best guys that I've met this year, by the way. He's just a good person. Naeem, when you and I saw him at Under Armour, holy cow, can he run? You got Connor Salmon, who might be even faster. It's debatable. He's running a 10-4. That's a good problem to have the last time I checked. And they're still not done there because they got Adam Guthrie, an offensive tackle out of the state of Ohio that had several offers around the country too. So 7 guys in a row like that in that short span, that's really impressive. I'm curious to see what they do next, but your point is fun. Who's next to do that? I don't know, but that's not only did they get 7 guys, those are guys that had offers from the Ohio States and big time ACC, Big Ten, SEC program. So that's really, really, really unique. When we come back,
all blue chippers too, right? I think.
Oh yeah,
all 4 stars are better, right? So
so
not bad.
Yeah, that's unusual. Usually there's like even Clemson. There's one guy that's a developmental guy, etc. mixed in. This was a true recruiting heater. When we come back, we're going to talk about one of the best defensive tackles I have seen in years and how important defensive tackle recruiting is. That is next here on The Portal. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering, worrying if you were going to get any money back, then waiting, wondering, worrying some more. Now taxes, it's about matching with TurboTax Expert, so you can do your taxes in as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find your every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All you have to do then is sit back and get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, wondering, or worries. Now this is taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live, full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. John, I had the privilege of going to Under Armour New Orleans this past weekend, and I'd heard a lot about Richard Anderson. There's no way that you or anybody else could have prepared me for seeing somebody that weighs 356 pounds, face-to-face conversation. Usually kids lie about their weight. He didn't care. And the way he moves, I see why he didn't care. At 356, he was, and I'm not kidding on this, he was more agile than a lot of guys 270. We can't teach that. As an interior pass rusher, he made a kid miss so bad in one-on-ones off a spin move, there might as well not have been an offensive guard in front of it. It was comical watching him. He would start at many major college football programs right now. That is unbelievably rare at the D tackle position. To put it in perspective, there's a certain defensive tackle right now playing for the Philadelphia Eagles that's from Apopka, Florida, played for the Georgia Bulldogs. That would be the guy that it reminds me of the most. And I know that's high praise. But since then, I really don't know if there's been a D tackle as talented as Anderson. He's committed to LSU. He's from Edna Karr High School in New Orleans. Explain to people why we get so excited about D tackles that are all-encompassing, meaning they're not just a big guy that can two-gap and run stuff. Why is it so important to a college football program?
Because, look, we talked about the importance of the offensive tackle position on the outside, right? And that's the conventional spot where you see great pass rushers impact the passer. Well, there's a couple spots where it's just simply a quicker impact. And that's, of course, on the interior. If you can get a guy who can move humanity on the interior and play athletic off of it and rush the passer from the interior, it's a quicker path to the passer. And ask any quarterback ever. I'm talking way in the black and white days of film, all the way into the spread, no huddle, whatever you want to call it. What pisses off a quarterback the most? It is a collapsed pocket. It is somebody in your face immediately. And when it's 356-pound Richard Anderson, you feel it that much more. So, yeah, that is something that against the run or the pass, if you can collapse the pocket right off the snap of the ball, right after it, from the person who snapped it, you're going to wreck a play. I mean, it just is what it is. And again, go back to the Super Bowl, go back to the national championship, go back to any of it. It's won in the trenches, and those better defensive lines won those games because they could take it over. And it almost doesn't matter what the back 7 or 8 guys are doing if the front 3 or 4 are that dominant. So when you have someone in the middle who commands at a minimum respect, now you're bringing a guard to chip. You're having the back pull up. You're losing him in the pass route. So you're now allocating more bodies to the interior, which then again goes back to the outside, frees up those guys. So if you've got some athleticism out there, now there's a one-on-one opportunity. So like any front 4 player, if you can command extra attention, you're starting to make offensive coordinators, sleep less and less. So any quarterback hates that immediate pressure on the interior. So when you find a guy who is big and powerful, yet nimble enough to move and to spin and to create pass rushing momentum, it really is one of the rarest things that we see in the sport. And I think this class of 2026, it's a perfect example, right? Because it's not the OT group that we talked about, where there's 7, 8, 9, 10 guys that you're like, whoa, these are all top 50, top 60 type guys. Defensive tackle might not be there in the class of 2026. There's some smaller, scrappier guys, and there's some bigger two-gap guys, but maybe not that hybrid. So if Anderson becomes that guy, I think that's a huge deal because there's just not that many, at least right now as we stand in mid-March, in this class that are of that level. So naturally, huge get for LSU, keeping him home and keeping him home early because, Louisiana is a state that, yes, the Tigers are going to get the benefit of the doubt, but we've seen, Alabama, we've seen Texas, we've seen these schools come into Louisiana and pull elite recruits out time and time again, and it starts at the very top. So if that's going to happen, it's a bigger uphill climb because Anderson has jumped on board so early with LSU, despite some transition in that coaching staff.
My bad. I think he's going to stick with the Tigers, and I know that a lot of people are kind of curious. He's going to take visits. He said Florida came in second. He said USC was too far. He had a good relationship with some of UF's coaching staff and whatnot. But this kid's probably just going to LSU. Like most kids from New Orleans, he grew up with Tiger, the whole 9 yards. And they've done a good job of recruiting him. Looking at the group overall, defensively, we're talking about not just good defensive tackles. Again, we got some really talented ones, but they're different. Richard is, like you guys, rivals, as I pull it up on the screen here for those of you that are watching on YouTube, he's listed at 310 pounds by you, but he told me to my face he's up to 356, and he carries it well. It's just insane. Richard, you guys got a guy that I know well and you know well, Deuce Gerald's out of Collins Hill in the greater Atlanta area. Number 2, he's a much different kind of player. He's a little smaller, but my goodness, is he athletic. He's the one gap and go guy. You've also got some other players that are a little bit more like that 290, 300 pounds. But again, I'll take Richard Anderson just because you can't teach 356 pounds, John. That's one of the rarest things that I've ever seen, what he did this past weekend. And there are other guys too. And it's ironic because one of the best defensive linemen in the country, depending on how you want to rank him, is a guy also in the state of Louisiana, Lamar Brown, but most people project him as, he told me that he's going to play defense in college. I don't know how we rank him now, but he's 285 pounds, but he wants to play defense. Fair enough.
Yeah, might be the biggest guy listed as athlete in the country if we go that route.
Hey, he's 285, told me he wants to play this fall at 290. A&M, LSU, Miami, Florida State were the 4 he knows he's going to visit. There could be others. The state of Louisiana recruiting, by the way, for defensive line is just insane year in, year out. Anything that you want to add as far as D-tackle, like why you think it's so important? Because like you said, Ohio State, look, when you could drop 7, by the way, and just rush 4, that's what the Eagles did. Ask a certain quarterback in Kansas City how important that is.
Yeah.
But there aren't many teams at the college level that can do that, because if you're good at D-tackle, you're probably a junior and you're probably gone. They don't get them for very long. Anybody that you think that's like, this is a school to get over the top, they need defensive tackle recruiting, or anything else you want to add to that?
It's everyone. I mean, it's every program in the country. I mean, you look at the teams that have been doing it at the highest clip. I think Ohio State's going to have several drafted. Notre Dame's been good every year on the defensive interior. Texas has surged. A lot of it, is credited to Sark and that offense, but really the defensive line resurgence in Austin starts with those big interior guys, Sweat and Alfred Collins and those guys over the last few years. So you look at the programs, Penn State's great up front. You look at the programs that are consistently there. Georgia speaks for itself as well. They've got some type of alpha. And like you said, it's usually not paired with others, but if you could start to build that, you'll be dominant, and your rise to that level, whether it's conference or the CFP itself, will be that much quicker because you're able to play one off of the other. So, and then it goes the other way too. If you don't have those guys up front, it starts to show. Alabama maybe doesn't have that guy on the interior that they've had in the past, and they've maybe taken a step back as a result. I mean, it really goes down the line. So I do think it's as critical. It's not as sexy to talk about, right? But it's as critical as any other premium position. It's DT, DE, offensive tackle, quarterback, and corner. I mean, those are the positions that really make this thing go. And we talk, maybe too much about QB and wide receiver and some of those, and pass rushers are fun. But when you talk about, big interior guys, it really could change your program. So I do think that this class being, at least weaker or having a lot of variety at the top of the list, it's going to make those recruitments that much more national. We're seeing high 3-star guys going national at the defensive tackle position, like a Brian Harris from Jacksonville, right? Committed to Maryland early. People didn't know about him. Boom, a couple nice, flashes as a junior despite injury and some great camp efforts. And now all of a sudden, he just got Michigan. He's got Penn State. Oklahoma's now pushing for him. I mean, this has become a national recruit because there's just not that many big interior guys who could make moves like that. So, I think it makes the top of the list that much more coveted. So for a shoe-in of a Richard Anderson, a guy like a Deuce Geralds or some of these other guys, Preston Carey, they're near the top of the list, their recruitments, I think, become that much more contested and maybe has more contenders than a normal year because it is not that loaded at the very top because it's that important of a position. And you look at the offer list for those top 5 or 6 guys, and it looks as good or better than the list of those top offensive tackles, even though the offensive tackle group is much stronger on paper.
Yeah, I think if you can get guys like, I'm using Richard Anderson, I'm stealing here. If you're not double teaming him, it creates problems in most of the major programs, LSU included. That means you've got not 1, but 2 guys on the perimeter that are one-on-one, unless, as you noted earlier in the show, you're chipping or you're leaving a tight end, like you screw up your own pass routes. You're playing 6-on-4 with blocking because, like, you got a tight end and running back helping out and they don't pass. That's a problem. Even if you've got elite receivers like Alabama or Texas, somebody, that becomes a problem. He may not make more than 1 or 2 tackles in a game and be the most important player on the football field. That is such a huge, huge advantage. And I don't know how you could really do anything about it because he's the closest player defensively to the football when it's snapped. If you screw that up, it's downhill, brother. It's really downhill. John, thank you very much for coming on the show again today. Tell everybody where they can find your work.
Yeah, real simple. Rivals.com. Camp season is in full swing. OT7 this weekend. A lot going on before Rivals Miami at the end of the month.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've got a lot of stuff going on, 2 more camps. I'm going to a 5-on-5 this weekend. It's not surprisingly. You can find all my work everywhere on the platforms that you get your audio downloads, as well as on YouTube. Just search for the Portal Podcast. We will talk to you again soon.